We're happy to have with us Professor Dausner, who teaches at Hildesheim, who is specialist of fundamental theology, relations between theology and philosophy, also questions on Judaic studies, and who is a member of the Juden und Christen Gesprächskreis, the Jewish and Christian discussion group of the Central Committee of the German Catholics. Thank you for being with us.
Dear Mr. President, dear Mr. Director, dear Mrs. Brenningmeier, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor to join the 18th annual Brenningmeier-Wehrhahn lecture for the first time. And I'm personally very grateful for this invitation, as I've just been appointed as University Professor for Systematic Theology at the University of Hildesheim last month. The subject of my lecture fits very well to my new situation, for I'm going to speak about the future of Nostra Aetate. Once upon a time, in the bright 60s, there was plenty of future on offer. Aleida Assmann opens her book, Is Time Out of Joint?, with this quotation that may sound sad. But Aleida Assmann, who has just been awarded with the Peace Prize of the German Book Trade 2018, does not emphasize the melancholic side of this phrase. She rather reads the sentence on the past future as a sign that stands for a shift in historiography itself. Whereas in former times history academically had been the field of research on the past, recent approaches have shown different forms of future that were part of the past, as Assmann clearly states. She refers to Reinhard Koselleck and his work on past future in order to show that future is also part of the historical time. Once upon a time, in the bright 60s, there was plenty of future on offer. End quote. With regard to the 1960s, one can read this phrase also as an optimistic description of this past period that had been influential for society and politics as well as for theology and for the interreligious dialogue, especially between Judaism and Christianity. I am deeply convinced that we can look upon the time of the Second Vatican Council that took place from 1962 until 1965, and that had been of inestimable value for an open Catholicism, as Karl Rahner put it. But what is the situation today? How do we look upon the future of Nostra Aetate? In my lecture on this question about the future, I will focus on three major points. First, I will briefly describe the status quo of the reception of Nostra Aetate, especially with regard to the 15th anniversary of the Second Vatican Council. And in the following, I will concentrate on the future of Nostra Aetate that can be explained twofold. Either the reception of Nostra Aetate will decrease and lose its constitutional role in Christian theology, or Nostra Aetate will remain a central document of Vatican II and will play a decisive role in the ongoing and coming discussions in theological, political, and sociological debates. Remembering the future This was the title not only of a 4-day international conference in May 2012 on Vatican II, taking place at Georgetown University. It was also a title of a book about the Second Vatican Council in Europe as a memory of Vatican II that opened theology and the Catholic Church for the future. According to Hubert Wolf, the well-known professor of church history, it had become necessary to remember this past future as this innovative council nearly had been forgotten in our days. Of course, one can reply, there have been great number of conferences on Vatican II between 2012 and 2015 all over the world, celebrating the 15th anniversary of the Second Vatican Council. But in my seminars and lectures at university in Eichstätt and Hildesheim, I often made and make the experience that undergraduate students have heard very little about this recent council that opened Catholicism for the modern world. In other words, there is still the necessity to inform the next generations about the courageous work of the fathers of the council, especially on the Jewish-Christian dialogue. We've heard that in the first lecture. Nostra Aetate will only have a future if we remember the past. But how can this future look like? What are the questions we have to ask more than 50 years after the promulgation of Nostra Aetate? Before I try to give a twofold answer to these questions, I want to look back very shortly. First, we have to recognize that the Declaration on the Relation of the Church to Non-Christian Religions, as the subtitle of Nostra Aetate says, is worldwide one of the most intensively received texts of Vatican II. And its importance is still growing if we imagine the increasing political role of religions and of interreligious dialogue nowadays. Within this scenario, it is worth to remember that the article on the relationship to Judaism, Nostra Aetate number 4, has been the original nucleus, as John Österreicher said, the original nucleus of the declaration. That is the reason why I have described the specific and decisive role of Nostra Aetate 4 as a declaration within the declaration. The question about the future of Nostra Aetate, therefore, is precisely the question about the future of Nostra Aetate number 4. Even if nowadays the public interest and the research focus on Islam is intensified, we must not neglect intensifying the research on the Jewish-Christian relationship. Only if we keep in mind the unique relationship between Christianity and Judaism, we can open and widen the perspective to other religions, including, of course, the Islam. Both Judaism and Christianity have as well an own as a common ground for a dialogue with the Islam. Remembering the future of Nostra Aetate 4 means to remember the new vision of the Church's relationship with the Jewish people. Father John Pawlikowski has pointed out 3 central points to characterize this new vision. Quote, you find it on your text in the handout. Jews were not collectively responsible for the murder of Jesus. Second, as a result, Jews cannot be portrayed as having been exiled from the original covenant with God. And third, Jews drew positively from the Jewish tradition of his time in his preaching. These 3 perspectives on the Jewish-Christian relationship have certainly provided a solid building block for the development of a new theological understanding between 2 faith communities. End quote. This new vision was not accepted by all at once. Some were afraid of the political implications of such a declaration. Others were unable to recognize the theological necessity of historical discontinuity in order to find back to the biblical origins. This new vision, which is based on the continuity with the Holy Scriptures, has been worked out by a theologian who was aware of both parts of the Bible, the first and the Second Testament, as Erich Zenger always said, and his name was Augustin Kardinal Beer. Kardinal Beer emphasized the theological side of the declaration of the relationship to Judaism, even if he certainly knew about its political impacts. Therefore, it is remarkable that Kardinal Beer presented a statement on November 19, 1963, we heard about that, where he remembered theological thoughts by St. Paul on Israel. Beer quotes from the letter to the Romans, quote, "The gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable," end quote. Nostra Aetate is also referring to this sentence, God does not repent the gifts he makes or the calls he issues. But Kardinal Beer went even further when he added that St. Paul confirmed that all Israel will be saved. Romans 11:26. This quotation that is missing in Nostra Aetate 4, this quotation is even more astonishing as it is missed in Nostra Aetate 4, whereas it has become a point of greatest interest for the theological debate after Vatican II. On the one hand, the reference to St. Paul allows to show a continuity from the Second Vatican Council back to the New Testament without concealing the disastrous history of anti-Judaism. On the other hand, St. Paul gives the opportunity to leave the path of any mission work among the Jews. For Rabbi Abraham Jehoshua Heschel, any attempt of Christian mission among Jews was regarded as unacceptable. In 1964, on September 3, he wrote in the New York Times his quotation that I found in a text by Susanna Heschel, the daughter of Abraham Heschel. Quote, "It must be stated that spiritual fratricide is hardly a means for the attainment of fraternal discussion or reciprocal understanding. A message that regards the Jews as candidates for conversion and proclaims that the destiny of Judaism is to disappear will be abhorred by Jews all over the world and is bound to foster reciprocal distrust as well as bitterness and resentment. As I have repeatedly stated to leading personalities at the Vatican, I am ready to go to Auschwitz if faced with the alternative of conversion or death." End quote. From this point of view, we clearly see that the future of Nostra Aetate 4 shall be a future of fraternity and reciprocal understanding rather than the wish to return to a missionary work among Jews. To summarize, the heritage of Nostra Aetate 4 is a future of dialogue among brothers and sisters, tracing back to the biblical testimonies of God. Giving up this perspective would destroy the future and lead back to the historical place of destruction, which is named Auschwitz. Second, the disappearance of Nostra Aetate in future. The first possibility is that the importance of Nostra Aetate 4 will decrease. As long as Nostra Aetate 4 is seen as the original nucleus of the whole declaration, the discussion on the relationship between Christianity and Judaism is the focus of the text. Premise to this thought is that there is a theological predominance of the relationship between Christianity and Judaism. Among others, I have argued for the thesis that this relationship is unique and incomparable to the relationship with other religions. And because of this incomparable relationship, it becomes possible to realize a dialogue with other religions. For more than 50 years, the special role of Judaism for Christianity has been accepted. Is there still work to be done? But even if it is easily can be shown that there still is the importance for new research projects, the question in future will be if it would be worth to understand systematic theology in terms of a so-called comparative theology. Very recently, John Tatamanil has published a contribution on comparative theology and the future of Nostra Aetate. In contrast to what the title says, I would argue that this suggested future of Nostra Aetate does not suggest the future of Nostra Aetate, but instead its disappearance. Why? Well, first, the author states that Nostra Aetate articulates a graded inclusivism in which some traditions appear to rank higher than others. The author wants to overcome this paradigm. And his suggestion is not simply identical with a pluralistic thinking. Instead, he wants to reject the premise that it is meaningful to speak about religions as a whole. According to his comparative thinking, Tatamanil develops paragraphs for a new Nostra Aetate. This attempt does not offer a rewriting of the entire document, but only a few key selected paragraphs. His contribution seems to fit to the intention of our conference. And even more, the text opens the declaration Nostra Aetate for an intensified interreligious dialogue that also keeps in mind the religion traditions of Asia. On the other hand, the new Nostra Aetate does no longer concentrate on the Jewish-Christian dialogue, and instead, the text does not refer to Judaism anyway. Neglecting the graded inclusivism that is substantial to the theology of religions according to the Second Vatican Council, the future of Nostra Aetate worked out by a comparative theology will decrease. It has to be asked how the pretended objectivity of comparative thinking can integrate history and subjectivity, that both is absolutely necessary to understand biblical testimony. And now third, the growing importance of Nostra Aetate. As it is said in the first sentence of Nostra Aetate, the mystery of the Church refers back to the spiritual bond between Judaism and Christianity. Taking Nostra Aetate seriously means, therefore, to acknowledge the unique, that means the incomparable relationship between Judaism and Christianity. I am convinced that the future of Nostra Aetate in general is based on the future of Nostra Aetate number 4. Systematic theology is challenged by this thinking of the incomparable with the comparable, within the comparable. The incomparable situation of the dialogue with Judaism is also expressed in the final declaration of the International Congress that took place from December 6 to 8, 2015 in Munich. As a member of the Congress Bureau, from the very beginning of the organization of this Congress in 2012, I wanted to focus clearly on the future of Vatican II and especially of Nostra Aetate 4. The title of this Congress, Disclosing the Council, referred back to Karl Rahner's insight that the end of the Council would have to be its beginning. And we as the organizers were convinced that even 50 years after its closing and a long period of reception, the council had to be reopened to future. 50 years are a symbolic number that stands for a threshold where the coming reception can be prepared and disclosed. Finally, I would like to summarize briefly the results of our Congress concerning the future of Nostra Aetate 4. The paragraph that we dedicated to the relationship between the Church and Judaism is the following, and you can read it on the handout. Quote, "The Council made groundbreaking basic statements on the relationship between the Church and Judaism. The Congress fully affirms the directives and the findings of earlier Christian-Jewish conversations. In view of the guilt arising from history in church and theology, this remains a permanent commitment. We are committed to respecting this obligation in all theological disciplines and to receiving it more deeply. When translating and interpreting biblical and liturgical texts, we are committed to bearing in mind the Jewish context and to avoiding all forms of anti-Judaism. In society, theology speaks out against any kind of anti-Semitism and xenophobia. In the indispensable dialogue between Christianity and Islam, theology advocates maintaining the unique relationship between Jews and Christians as the basis of the Christian-Muslim dialogue." End quote. Together with my own theological teacher, Josef Wohlmuth, I have written a commentary on this paragraph where we have mentioned Israel Yuval and his outstanding work, Two Nations in Your Womb. This metaphor clearly shows the mutual relationship between Judaism and Christianity. It is therefore consequent, but nevertheless remarkable, that after Dabro Emet in 2003, two Jewish Orthodox declarations have appreciated the change in the relationship between Christianity and Judaism. And it is not surprising that Josef Ratzinger's recent text on the Jewish-Christian dialogue has been irritating not only the Jewish side. It has to remain clear that Nostra Aetate 4 opened a new perspective on the Jewish-Christian dialogue, referring back to the biblical tradition, especially to the theology of St. Paul. What could the future of Nostra Aetate 4 look like? 5 theses. First, in reception and with regard to Nostra Aetate, it has to be stressed out in future and even today a clear no to mission among the Jews, as it has been done by the discussion group Jews and Christians of the Central Committee of German Catholics. Second, theologically, it has to be discussed the question whether or not it will be possible to agree in all different groups and parties in Judaism and Christianity, and despite Christology and Trinity, to worship one God. Third, the different interpretations of Jesus Christ by Judaism and Christianity have to be part of the dialogue as well. The systematic theological consequences for Christology based on the new historical insights will have to be worked out. Here have to be named persons like Daniel Boyarin, Walter Homolka, and Susanna Herschel. Fourth, according to the theopractical questions, it has to be asked if there is the ability to find different forms of prayers, perhaps common prayers. And fifth, furthermore, the Christian side will have to come together to admit that because of the loyalty of the one God, all Israel will be saved. From this point of view, it has to be worked out that the statement of Vatican II for a universal salvation of mankind is a sign of hope that Jews and Christians share, a sign of hope for our time and future. Thank you.